MRI safety is at the forefront of our profession. It starts with protecting Zone 4 and is why the ACR recommends using a caution barrier at the Zone 4 entrance. But what good is another sign in a room full of signs? Well, Aegis has created the perfect solution with TechGate Auto. TechGate Auto allows more focus on the patient and less worries about someone entering the room without being cleared. If you're serious about MRI safety, use the link in the description below to find out more.
Zone 3 Podcast, I am Robert.
Yes, and I am Reggie.
And today we are joined by a returning guest, Matt Hayes.
Yes.
Hey guys.
Matt,
What's
hi.
up, man?
Hi.
Welcome back.
Welcome
Thanks.
to the beautiful land of Phoenix. And you come from?
Cary, North Carolina, right outside of Raleigh.
Nice, Raleigh.
So it's
Raleigh.
probably starting to get into that beautiful weather, just that 1 week window of good weather in North Carolina.
Spring.
That's not true. First of all, now
It's the worst humidity I've ever experienced. North
summer is
Carolina.
hot, winter is cold, spring and fall we have a very solid seasons. Here
Oh.
in Phoenix, you have different types of summer.
Yeah.
Right. Yep.
Last time I was here in June, you walk
Oh, yeah.
outside, if there's a breeze, it's like someone has a hairdryer directly at your face.
It's absolutely true. And you see
Legit.
people driving motorcycles.
I-
Katie, did you ride motorcycles in July?
Absolutely. Yes,
Was it
absolutely.
like a furnace?
Absolutely.
Why would you
It's
do
like
that?
a sauna, but
When
with
you
a
have car
breeze.
with AC.
Yeah. Do you hate
Yeah.
yourself?
No.
No. Okay,
It's just fun. It's just
Yeah,
fun.
it's
Did
just
you wear
fun.
leather too?
No.
No.
Look at
Aren't
you.
you supposed to
No.
wear your
Yes,
leather
but
stuff?
no.
No.
Did you at least wear a helmet? Arizona doesn't have a helmet law.
Multiple choice questions.
So you're in compliance no matter what.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. Mom and dad
Perfect.
are listening.
How are the turtles?
Yo.
Wow. And I'm impressed that you remember that.
Yeah.
So whose turtle do you care more about?
Yeah. Is it Michelangelo?
My
Donatello?
turtle's bigger, by the
I
way.
wasn't so
The Ninja Turtles, right?
for everybody that doesn't know this or is new to this or just whatever. These dudes have huge turtles in their backyards.
Wink when you say it.
All right, well, and we're there.
It's crazy because we didn't before we even met each other. We had these turtles. So when we met, it's like, oh man, you got a desert tortoise too?
Desert tortoise. And
Yeah.
the funny thing is people go, is it a tortoise? Is it a turtle? Just to clear it up, Matt, a turtle is a tortoise,
Right.
and a tortoise is a turtle.
I've been wondering. I mean, I actually got
What
no
I say
sleep
is a
lately.
tortoise is
Right.
always a turtle, but a turtle's not always a tortoise. And the example that I give is a black lab is always a dog, but a dog is not always a black lab.
Sorry, I blacked out a while ago. I started thinking about
We were pre-gaming, and
I
it was me that
started listening,
pre-gaming.
but then I just went on living my life.
You know what? Honestly, I appreciate your honesty because I would have just played it off. I would have given you a nod and a smile.
Like wrinkle my eyebrows and go, whoa.
Yeah, that's interesting. And then I would have maybe tried to change the subject
Wait.
in a non-awkward way.
So I'll try this to do this in post. This is what Reggie and Robert's turtles and tortoises look like.
Yes, thank you. All right. so
Cool,
this is-
right?
Yeah.
Well, you've done this before.
Yeah.
Once with you guys.
You are a professional. And actually, you are on today to discuss, because you're such a professional,
Yeah.
diffusion imaging, which I think is like an episode we should have covered, a year ago. How have we not done this episode,
Right.
yet, Reggie?
It's pretty important, right?
It's something that we do every day,
Right.
and we don't really know. A lot of us don't know how it works.
Yeah.
We know.
We love
know,
the sound. I love the sound.
Yeah. So
Sorry, go.
it's so soothing. No, but you don't know. We know it rules out stroke, right? We know that it can be used to see tumors, things like that. But what's a b-value? Why does it work? How's the sequence go? How can we maximize image quality? We typically just say go, and that's that. But
Magic.
Diffusion is something that is really, really, it's straightforward and it's practical, how it works. And diffusion is not just inside of MRI. I mean, diffusion at the beginning was the theory of diffusion was it came up with by a botanist, a guy that worked with plants, Robert Brown.
Right.
So, and this guy came up and said, hey, there's randomized water motion that's running through all living things. And so that's what we're looking at. We're looking to see, in normal tissues, we're looking to see randomized water moving in and around cells and macromolecules and structures and things like that.
So when they say something like diffusion restriction,
Restricted diffusion, yeah.
right? That means the water's not moving, type of thing.
That's right. And so the idea here is inside of diffusion as a whole, we are playing a game where we're losing signal on purpose with the water that is moving, and we're only getting our signal from the water that is holding still. And that water can either be holding still one of two reasons. One is that there's some kind of barrier, so the water can't move as freely, or because there's a tumor, and or a stroke or something like that that's making it to where the water's also not moving. And I'll show you what I mean here. So the purpose of
Top down.
What is it?
We're going top down on them.
That's amazing.
Yeah, we going top down.
So
Sorry, I had to say it twice.
when we say
I wasn't expecting that. I'm sorry.
when we say diffusion, we talk about B values. It's how you guys are giggling. So
Sorry.
when we're talking about diffusion, we're turning on gradients for a certain amount of time. So a diffusion image with no gradients turned on, it's not a diffusion weighted image.
Right.
If you notice, it looks very close to a T2, just a T2 gradient echo, whatever. It can be lots of different things actually, but at that point, everything is going to be bright because we have not purposefully tried to dephase and rephase all the protons inside of that slice. So that's the purpose of a gradient. I'm trying to, I don't know, let's just say I'm turning on a gradient for this amount of time and this amount of time. So let's say this is just our gradient.
Right.
So the first gradient is going to be a positive gradient, and it doesn't have to be, but the second gradient will be a negative gradient. Sometimes you could still do a positive and a negative, and they could both be straight up. But in this case, just for the sake of things, what we're trying to do here, if I'm looking at my brain, I want to dephase and then rephase my protons, because really inside of a diffusion weighted image, only the protons, the water protons that have been dephased and rephased, generate a signal.
Right. Now, I got a quick question.
Yeah.
This looks bipolar to me, right? Is when we put in like monopolar and things like that to change the mode, are we changing how the phases are swapping?
So you're specifically talking about Siemens at this point, right?
Oh, that is Siemens, yeah.
But the idea is that what you want to do is also, they don't have as much problems with this anymore, is we're using the bipolar scheme. If you're talking Siemens or something like that, you're actually using 4 gradients that you're turning on. Whereas monopolar is kind of, in this case, just like this. But you, like I said, you can do it anyway.
Right, okay.
But the whole point of this is going well. The whole point of this is that you want to try to dephase and then rephase the protons.
Okay.
So, and if you notice, the higher the B value you're using, the more diffusion weighted that you're actually getting. So, and we'll get to that. So let's just talk about the idea of why something would be bright or something would be dark on the longer B values. Okay? So if I have all of these cells, right? I have just cells, and those cells have they have lots of little holes in them, and so they have your little cell walls. And the whole point of these cell walls is to be able to get rid of sodium chloride and keep potassium. There's a sodium-potassium pump, and they work on the premise of they need energy to work, and they use something called adenosine triphosphate, ATP. And so that's the gas of the cell. It needs an energy source to be able to constantly pump. Okay, so but and this is the capillary bed. We got yummy blood moving through here, and nutrients and things like that. Okay, So, but until one day, now we have a thrombus or a little clot that comes in, and ultimately that clot is going to be larger. The size of that thrombus is going to be larger than the diameter of the vessel. So at this point, we get no more adenosine triphosphate to any of the cells. Right? Okay, so what do these cells do? They can no longer keep pumping out sodium chloride and keep in potassium, and so what do they start to do? They start to swell. Now normally, you have two types of motion that's happening, or water exchange, inside of a cell. When it's coming in and out of the cell wall, of the cell membrane, that is intracellular water. So, right, it's going in and out.
Mm-hmm.
And now you also have extracellular water. This is the water that's just randomly going, up through the cells, just all over the place. Now, in a normal group of cells, water is just moving freely all over the place. There's nothing getting in the way. But with diffusion, after the cells start to swell secondary to a stroke or anything like that, now you have this water that's stuck in between. So there is no extracellular motion that's happening right here. There's no intracellular motion because it no longer has the ability to continue to pump. So all this water is holding still. Okay? So meanwhile, we've chosen this gradient here to where out here, we're choosing this water here. It may be in the slice for the dephasing, but it's not going to be in the slice for the rephasing. Therefore, it's going to get darker. Mm-hmm. So if you look at a normal diffusion, if it's a normal, you look at a B-value of 1,000 inside of a brain, mm-hmm. you'll notice that your B-value of 0 is super bright, looks like a T2. Your B-value of, let's say if you're doing an intermediate, like a 400, it looks gray. And then you have the longer the B-value you get, that you use, the darker your image is getting. And that's on purpose. That's making it to where the only things that are experiencing both of these gradients and generating a signal is the water that is stuck. So that's the whole point. It's kind of it's the same kind of premise as a time of flight. Only the things, in this case, that are not moving are going to have the chance to generate a signal.
Right. So that's why when you see that stroke, it's popping up bright, right?
Yeah, it's exactly, and that's restricted diffusion.
Right.
So if I'm looking at that, and you might not see that. So the reason why we need a certain B value in certain body parts is how closely these cells are positioned to each other to begin with.
Right.
So if you think about it, in the liver, we use pretty low B values, right?
Right.
Because the liver is very homogeneous. It has a lot of space in between the cells. We want to use a B value for long enough to where the normal water gets a chance to leave. If we use a B value that's too short, then even if there is a stroke, we wouldn't see it. We would have a false negative. And so, prostate, you have very, very high cell density there.
Ooh, right.
And so that's the reason why in prostate cancer or prostate, you have very long B values, meaning we are applying these gradients. This is a low B value. Let's say this would be a high B value, right? We're using
it's on for longer.
A gradient for a longer amount of time, and that makes it to where there's more of a chance. We make it very diffusion weighted, to where, because diffusion weighting is the same as it's a ADC is actually the property that we're looking for. So we'll get to that, but we're trying to make this to where we're insensitive to normal moving protons. We are sensitive to protons that are stuck, because they're going to receive both of these and generate a signal.
Nice.
Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, I like how you illustrated that. Yeah.
Painted it pretty well.
So I touched on the reason why we need longer B values, right? So, and if you break up that clot, there's ways. Some of this stuff is just dead. There's other parts of the brain called the penumbra that are at risk. That's one of the reasons why we do perfusion, so we can see the difference between the diffusion deficit, like the restricted diffusion area,
yes.
and then the perfusion deficit. So the penumbra would be a place in the brain that if we break up this clot, then that place of the brain will be saved. But this part of the brain that's been dead for whatever a certain amounts of time, it's like it's Goose from Top Gun. It's not coming back. You know what I mean? It's gone.
My boy Goose.
Yeah. So sorry to ruin the mood with that Top Gun reference, but I mean, as a whole, I love this.
I know, right? Well, calculated B values, right? Because you brought up prostate. And I know prostate and sometimes abdomens have calculated B values. Mm-hmm. Is that because it's just it's easier than leaving the gradients on for a long period of time? Just to, like, what's the purpose of a calculated B value?
Calculated B value, because gradients or diffusion is highly associated with distortion artifacts.
Yes,
big time, and we can go over why. That's a great question. But what you're trying to do in a calculated B value is you're using two B values to be able to kind of say, hey, if there is a specific, if we keep on losing signal at this rate and we turned on a B value, because you're gonna do like this. You're gonna in time. Let's say I'm just looking at signal. So in the x-axis is time, and up here in the y-axis is signal. So if I did a B value of 0, I would have a signal of this, right? Because all the water is contributing to the signal,
the
right?
signal, yeah.
We've done nothing to be able to purposefully lose that signal.
Right.
Sometimes people will do a B value of 50. The reason why they do a B value of 50 is because they want to get rid of perfusion effects. Because if you think about it, at B value of 0, you can't tell the difference between normal blood that's moving in between the cells and the blood that's actually moving in a vessel. So a lot of times people will use a B value of 50 to be able to, now they know that they're getting rid of the perfusion and only focusing on the diffusion.
Right.
Perfusion, blood; diffusion, water.
Nice.
Okay, but then you'll say, I'll do a 500 or whatever, and I'll do 1,000. And so based off of what you've gotten, and to be able to calculate a B value, you need at least 2 B values before it. Same thing, to calculate ADC, which we'll talk about, you need at least 2 B values to do that. So they're basically saying, if this relationship continues, what would it look like at 5,000? If you kept that relationship between time and dephasing, that's what it would look like. And there's goods and there's bads there. So the good is that you really, if you did that 5,000 millisecond diffusion, I mean, that would be, the patient would die of old age. You know what I mean? We're invoking a completely different type.
Right.
You have a ton of distortion and ghosting and stuff like that.
Right.
So that's the reason why that's what calculated B value is. The bad thing with having a longer B value, like a calculated B value, is that it's not. You're making a few assumptions, and there's also something called a kurtosis effect that basically makes it to where.
I got that on my elbows.
That does sound.
I don't want to show it on
camera. That does sound
camera.
like a skin condition. No, but it's a mismapping of the ADC because of macromolecules and different things like that. So there's goods and bads. Yeah.
Nice.
But, and I mean that's the idea of the reasons why we would sometimes want a calculated B value versus not.
That makes sense. Nice.
They
Thanks
do
for breaking that down.
You're welcome. They do that a lot for prostate, and there are papers. People are kind of split. There's no like unanimous, because a lot of people say, "Hey, I really want to minimize my artifacts," but at the same time, a calculated B value of 5,000 is not going to look like a true, actually acquired B value of 5,000.
Okay.
So,
Nice.
Well, you said it's more susceptible to artifacts and stuff. What do you know? Is there tricks to help mitigate that?
You mean diffusion as a whole?
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Is there a way to minimize the artifacts of
This dry erase board?
yeah, so we have, what really it comes down to is and one of the big like unsung heroes of just image quality in MRI as a whole is called echo spacing. Mm-hmm. Now, if you recall, the way that we fill K-space typically, so we have two different ways to do diffusion now. So you have single shot, because we love diffusion because it's so fast. We don't love diffusion because of the artifacts. So if you're willing, this just in, MRI as a trade-off, and what we really want to be able to have a very quick sequence, so we can measure those small changes in water, and how it's moving. So how we do, normally in a spin echo, fast spin echo, you're going to excite and read out, and you're going to fill 3 or 4 lines of K-space, and then you're going to do it again and fill the next 3 or 4 lines of K-space, and again until all the lines of K-space are filled. But in diffusion, you'll always notice you are getting, if you're doing a single shot, you're getting full brain in every single TR.
One shot,
so
yeah.
just you get an entire brain over and over and over again. And
Nice.
that's because we're filling K-space this way. We're doing it, so we read out, and we do a positive gradient, then we do a negative readout, and then a positive phase gradient, then and just so on and so forth. Right? So we're using this rectolinearly, it's called.
And that's why it has that alarm-like noise, right? Because it's so rapid, like?
Well, yeah,
it's like,
because you're turning on. That's true. How is it one more time?
I want to hear that again. Good. Thank you, man.
Yeah. Well,
Point the finger.
You got to do the finger, too.
the international sign for gradients. Like
Yeah, see?
if you're ever in a foreign country and you're like, oh, gradient. Yeah. No, I'm with you. The reason, what we're trying to do here, if you were to look at echo spacing, it's actually the time it takes to go. Let's just do it. We'll get a little contrast here.
Yeah.
The time it takes to reach the same point of K-space, it goes all the way around. This is a pretty long echo spacing. So same thing. So if you're, and here, it's just how long is it taking from here to here? From here to here, from here to here. And so what happens here, because we are using a really small phase encoding gradient, we call them blips, we want these gradients to be larger, because the shorter, first of all, the less intense our phase amplitude is, the more artifacts we're going to have. So one of the reasons to help your image quality, if all you have is a single shot technique like this, is to be able to minimize or maximize the amplitude of your phase encoding gradient, these blips. Bloop, bloop, bloop.
There we go.
Right?
Nice.
So what you can do here is you can turn on, for Siemens iPat, for Philips Sense,
nice.
anything that skips lines of K-space.
Asset,
Because what we're going to do instead is we have a line, and that's not changing, but we have a larger amplitude phase gradient to be able to get us past that line that we're skipping. And so because we have these larger amplitudes, that will help reduce our distortions. That's one thing you can do.
Nice. Turn on parallel imaging.
Yeah, that's right.
Nice.
So now you're also losing signal when you do
Right.
parallel imaging. So keep that in mind. We're already losing a good amount of signal. So you may, if you're going to do parallel imaging, you want to compensate for that by usually increasing NEX, NSA averages, whatever you call it.
Right.
Okay? You don't need all the averages on the B0. You don't need it. You've got all that signal because you haven't dephased anything. So typically, you save your averages if you or your NSA or your everything for your later B values if you have that option on your software. You always want to minimize your TE. The TE is the boss when it comes to diffusion.
Nice.
So, and that's how you're going to get a lot of your signal back. So the reason, if you notice, what are some TRs and TEs that you notice that you use?
Usually at least above 3,000.
TRs usually above 3,000, yeah, because you want to have time for the recovery of water.
Right.
Because if you haven't allowed for the recovery of water, then there's no way we can
There's no
track
point.
it to begin with.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that's good. So, but you'll see the TE should always be minimized, because have you ever heard of that artifact called T2 shine through?
Oh, yeah.
The only reason that we have T2 shine through is because we're using TEs in the range of T2. We would ideally love for our B0 images to be proton density. We would love for a long TR and a short TE, but
High
because
signal.
of the application, because of how long we have to turn on these gradients for, our TEs are in the T2 range. So first thing you always should do, you should minimize your TE. TE does not, it's only hurting us. And in doing so, if you could theoretically get a TE that's super, super low, then you would eliminate the possibility of that T2 shine through artifact. But it's kind of
ball
the
game,
price
huh?
of business, yeah.
Yeah.
Until And you'll notice, because of peripheral nerve stimulation, you'll notice that no OEM, no vendor is going to come up with at least on-label gradient packages.
Oh, right.
You know, you'll have this new, great, wonderful magnet. That magnet will have the same ceiling of how quickly you can turn on your gradient because of the IEC's, the International Electrotechnical
standard.
Commission's,
That's right.
first, second level modes that are to be able to minimize peripheral nerve stimulation.
All right.
So that's one. So you need to minimize your TE. You need to use parallel imaging whenever possible, obviously compensating for that loss in signal. And you need to minimize your TR as well, but not down below 3,000. What you would normally never go below on a T2, you don't want to go below that on a diffusion sequence.
I see.
But is that clear?
Yeah.
Any questions so far?
I like it.
Yeah. So, but really also a big thing we want to try to do is minimize that time, this
Right.
echo spacing from here to here. How long did it take? And so this is a single shot. This is a single shot, and this is called an EPI readout. Right? So in EPI, echoplanar imaging, sometimes on a diffusion, you'll start out with a 90 and a 180. So it's a spin echo. It's a spin echo prep, but then you actually go and you read out K-space like this. Whereas normally, if you're doing a regular spin echo, right, I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, next TR, 1, 2, 3, and that's normal, like echo train length stuff.
Right.
If I have an echo train length of 3, that means I'm filling at 3 lines of K-space per TR.
Right.
Okay? So, but they've kind of done the same thing when it comes to segmented diffusion. And so instead of, let's say, reading it out like this, what you can do with segmented diffusion is you can be able to break up the readouts into multiple different readouts. So instead, and this is, Siemens calls this resolve. I don't know what other vendors call it.
Yeah.
guys
What
got
is
it?
Phillips?
Hey, we'll put them right here.
Yeah. Just look down below.
Okay. So, but instead of having these really long echo spacings, now I've got an echo spacing of just here to here. So I have a very, very minimized echo spacing. So, but the problem is it takes 3 times the number of readouts, and so so if I'm reading this out, whatever, same thing here, same readout. Sorry, ADD's kicking in. If I'm doing all of these 3, it's going to take, you'll notice that in those segmented K-spaces, or in those segmented diffusions, the image quality is amazing. It's really great for when it comes to cholesteatomas.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So you want to minimize that
Cholesteatomas.
air tissue interface.
Right.
So that would be a great opportunity to use something like this or any kind of single shot readout. But it increases your time big time. Now you can use, some vendors will have it to where you can use like partial Fourier in the readout direction, to where you can take this one and you kind of copy paste over, so you actually don't have to fill this out.
Oh.
That doesn't exist, right? So you're saving yourself some time. So there are ways to do it, but those are, in my opinion, the big ways to increase image quality when it comes to diffusion. But for everybody in the world, TE, you start out with your TE.
Have you ever heard about the phase direction? Like switching the phase direction to help with the distortion? Is that kind of an old school trick that we don't have to worry about anymore?
Not really. It just depends on, if you change, let's say you're doing diffusion and you're going to phase A to P. Sometimes people will say, I'll switch it and I'll go from P to A. It doesn't mean you're not getting rid of the distortion, you're just changing its appearance. So if there's a part of the brain that's more important to you, you can be able to swap.
Kind of move that distortion.
Yeah.
So it's almost like you're going to have to maybe run 2 if a patient has braces or something.
I mean, in my opinion, for braces, I mean, that's when you
Can't fight physics,
try to
right?
angle. Yeah, exactly. But I mean, I would also, that's where having a small echo spacing also decreases your susceptibility artifact as well.
Nice.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean we know the trick to angle it, but I still don't get the results that I hope for.
Because of
Physics.
So we're taking. Why do we love diffusion? It's fast and
Rapid.
And an EPI readout that we use in diffusion is the same readout that we use inside of perfusion. It's the same thing we use for bold. It's the same.
Right.
We want that fast but sometimes that distortion is our friend. A buddy of mine always says one man's artifact is another man's contrast, and it's absolutely correct. If you think about it, the EPI,
Nice.
we hate the susceptibility from braces because of this readout. But do we hate the susceptibility? That's the entire basis of fMRI.
Right.
The entire basis of
Perfusion.
We're
Right.
trying to exacerbate that effect.
Yeah.
And so I
I
mean,
like that.
So I'm actually kind of proud of myself that I didn't just say that I came up with that, because really he's
You
never
should
gonna watch
have.
this.
Yeah. Me too.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
no, it's one night in my study I was thinking with my pipe beside a fire, but
Monocle.
yeah. Yeah, so those are just because, if we didn't have the susceptibility that we're going to see when a patient has braces and things like that, we wouldn't have a readout fast enough to actually monitor the motion of water. You
Right.
can't measure water or anything like that in a spin echo or a fast spin echo. By the time I would go back and do this, it takes me probably 20 TRs to even get one slice. By that time, that water's from here down to a completely different area, and that's normal. So we got to take the good with the bad when it comes to the EPI readout and why we like it.
Right.
I also want to show you. So the reason why, because you have different contrasts, right? You have T1 contrast, T2 contrast. You have rates of susceptibility, so T2 star times, things like that. You also have ADC. ADC is just as much of a weighting type as T1 and T2. It is but we actually, so you'll always compare your high B value brain image, you'll compare it to an ADC. Hi everybody, thank you for watching. Hope you're enjoying this episode. So because of the complexity of this episode, Reggie and Robert were kind enough to show it to me in regards to diffusion, just to make sure I didn't mean one thing and say the other. And what I'm meaning to say right here, which I did not say, is that ADC is just as much of a tissue characteristic as the T1 time of that tissue or the T2 time of that tissue. So when I'm saying each thing has a TR or TE, what I'm really saying is that each voxel has its own, or each type of tissue has a certain T1 time, a certain T2 time, and a certain ADC. All right, enjoy the episode. Thanks for watching. Mm-hmm. So ADC stands for apparent diffusion coefficient. And what we're doing here is we're combining B values to not just see if water is moving or not, to be able to kind of figure out how fast water is moving.
Right.
So, and that's measured in micrometers squared per second. So it's a really, really tiny number. So, but the idea is on an ADC that you'll see if water is not moving, it has a low ADC, and that appears dark. If diffusion, on the diffusion side, if water is not moving and it's actually, you're getting dephased and rephased, and those protons are generating a signal, restricted diffusion comes out bright. So I was always taught, my first radiologist I ever trained under was a guy named Mark. So I was taught bright, dark, call Mark. So bright on diffusion, dark on ADC, that's where we're worried about an acute stroke.
Right.
That's going to change over time, you know what I mean? Things,
Yeah.
But typically for diffusion, an ADC, we're looking for acute stroke. We're not looking for old school stroke.
Right, because you don't want to send, especially if it's an outpatient, you don't want to send that person home
Yeah, exactly.
if they, had a
Okay, so
stroke.
I understand why you would want to look for restricted flow of water, but why necessarily would you be looking at the speed of water?
Because
To me, it's like a yes/no kind of a thing.
no, because there's different ADC values that are associated with different amounts of disease. And there's really, like, the scientific community doesn't sit there and say, this this
So
ADC
there's sort of
is
like an
this.
associated pathology based on that.
Yeah, exactly. But a lot of people will, ideally, what we're trying to do is reduce the chances for a false positive because of T2 shine through.
Right.
So if something, you'll see, because we're in that realm of T2 TEs, like longer TEs, you'll see that sometimes you get false positives. So if you cross-reference that with the ADC, then you'll be able to see. There's
That's
nothing
your
for debate.
confirmation. Bright, dark, call mark.
Well, bright, it's all right because that's
Hey,
right on
nice.
both, and that's
It's all
teaching
right.
through.
Dark.
Call Mark.
Don't call Mark.
I'm calling Mark every time, regardless, because it gives me anxiety.
Dark wouldn't happen because so yeah, if it's dark on diffusion or
That's a
on
trick question. You passed, Matt. Yeah.
I'm going to show this to my grandma. So, no, but I hope that makes sense.
No,
to
for
where,
sure.
I mean, and I hope it makes sense, especially when it comes to the B values that we need to use in different parts of the body to give that normal water a chance to leave.
Right.
So I'm trying to think if I forgot anything or anything I meant to talk about.
DTIs and stuff.
Well,
That leads us to That leads us to DTI. So
fancy diffusion. That's what I like to call it.
fancy.
She
Boy,
fancy.
fancy.
Yeah.
So okay, let me work on.
So
Bad
and
boy.
just to kind of fill the dead space, so my experience with DTIs is just like doing functional brain MRIs.
Yeah, pre-surgical.
Patients. And that's really my my limited experience.
You're doing DTI to be able to map, right? To be able to
Exactly, yeah.
to
So you're doing
map the
different
white matter
paradigms.
tracks, right?
Right. Help them.
Specifically the one that we do. I mean, we do different ones, but we do the heat.
Oh, yeah, for the research
Simulation,
studies.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So, what you want to do? I mean, obviously, if someone's going in for like some kind of resection,
Yeah, surgery.
you need to make sure that you're not gonna just because you take the tumor, and if you clip the white matter tracks there, you're kind of clipping the telephone wires.
Yeah.
So if you
That could leave a deficit,
yeah,
right?
how's that going to travel? Same thing with
Right.
MS. MS, you see like a patient's kind of like popping and locking. It looks like because there's such a long delay
Right.
between the myelin sheath, but so I mean.
It's good imagery.
So what we're trying to do with so right now on a regular diffusion, what we're doing is just seeing if water is moving or not. On a DTI, we're trying to map all the structures that would actually keep water from moving.
There you go. Thank you.
Nice.
Sorry. We're trying to. So remember. So let's think about this.
Say that last part one more time. So with the DTI, so just with the diffusion and then with the DTI, the differences.
So
one more time.
with the diffusion, we're putting on, typically we're turning on gradients in usually 3 directions, just 3 directions to be able to look, and we combine them into one. Back in the day, a radiologist would have to go back through and look at a diffusion gradient that was going right to left, and then diffusion gradient that was going A to P, and then a diffusion gradient that would be going head to foot, and then they had to combine those. Now the vendors, they put them all together anyway, called a trace image.
Right.
Probably noticed that.
Yeah.
But when you do a DTI, what we're trying to do is we're purposefully trying to turn on gradients in lots of different directions to be able to figure out the actual tracks, not to actually think about the water per se, although you still get your ADC and you still get your regular your regular B values. So you don't have to, if you're doing DTI, you don't have to do a diffusion as well. So
Right.
you can get the same information from both.
Redundant.
Yeah. I only say that because a guy I know when he first started, used to think that they were, very different, but it's just a souped up version of it. Instead of having 3 directions, you typically want to do at least 12 to 20.
And that increases the scan time, obviously, I would imagine.
Absolutely. Yeah, so you'll notice your DTI is always going to be longer than just regular diffusion. So let's think about this. So let's say we just have a white matter track here. Okay, so if I have a white matter track here, that means water, it can't really go this way, right? It can go this way, it can go this way, so it has what we call an eigen. So that means that it's going to have one direction that it goes, it has the most ability to move. That's called an eigenvector. Not really super important, but let's say, same thing, if we had another track that's going right here, you'll see this water has an has a direction, that's this and this, but it's much, much it has a direction, right? It's going this way. So if this water, is, let's just make it a little bit more simple again. If I have water that's moving this way, and this water is stuck right against this thing, that water has way more chance to be bright because it's not moving, so it gets dephased and rephased, and it generates a signal. If the water is moving this way, totally different bit of water, my goodness, totally different bit of water is just normal, its normal diffusion is moving this way. What are the chances that that's going to be? Because remember, it's also moving across a gradient. And so what are the chances that that proton is going to be dephased and rephased the same?
0.
Yeah, depending on its ADC, depending on how fast it's moving.
Right.
If it has a normal ADC, has a normal speed, yeah, then it will be mostly, it might be dephased, but not completely rephased because it experienced a different amplitude of the gradient.
Right.
So in this case, we would have lost signal for water that's moving in this direction. Whereas the water that's moving in this direction, if it had this boundary, it would be bright. So all we're trying to do inside of, and I know this is going to be, it's going to be very rudimentary, and you know that I'm terrible at drawing, but I'm looking at a coronal brain coming down, ventricle. Actually, I'm going to hang that on my fridge as well. Perfect.
It's like a ninja almost, or Spider-Man even. Sorry.
I'll sign that one again. Perfect. So, but ideally, what we're trying to do when we're turning on a DTI is we're putting a gradient that's going to go here, and a gradient that's going to be moving here, and a gradient that's going this way. And what we're trying to do is make it to where we are so sensitive to all ways that water can move.
Right.
Now we know, so if these white matter tracks, now we can know, because of all these different directions that we applied this in, we will know the actual structures that are stopping it. So if we go, Katie, can you change to the, what we were looking at? So if we're looking at this screen here, this is an example of just 2 different directions of your, okay. So it's looking for 2 different directions that we've applied
Push them
of
also.
these,
So it's
these,
on
there
the
we go. Okay, let's see if I get it now. Maybe I have to click once. To
Oh, yeah.
There it is. Okay, so let's just look at these portions of the posterior, the splenium area of the corpus callosum. So you'll see here, because there is a loss or a gain in signal right now, I must know that the water in this particular area is going perpendicular to whatever diffusion direction that I've turned on. So same thing. Let's look at signal loss. Oh, I keep on losing connectivity. Sorry. Maybe. If we look at areas of signal loss here, we can just. So you'll see here. Is that a wireless mouse or no? Okay, that's all right. So just look at the areas that you could look at the posterior in the occipital lobe. You see how this gradient, we must be doing kind of a gradient that's going A to P, kind of. I mean, they're never going to be just straight A to P. But you'll see we have signal loss in the right and left sides of the. What do you say?
Sorry.
That's okay. If you, Katie, can I use your mic over there and just.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That'll work.
Everybody knows what I look like. Swapsies. Okay. So.
You can move the mic closer, too.
Okay. So see, check this out.
Is that turned on, Katie?
Yeah.
Where am I?
So you can do it right here.
Oh, cool. So you'll see here these areas. So see the areas of white matter that are kind of known to be going anterior to posterior. They're losing signal here.
Oh, yeah.
You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So in this case, if water is moving A to P, it's getting dephased but not completely rephased or something like that for this specific application. Whereas in this case, you'll see water that is going, let's find it. We're going through here, and it's not going to be perfect, but you'll see we have very different amounts of actual signal that we're getting because we have a different application of the DTI of the vector.
For that slice.
Exactly right. Or for that, not for that slice, but for that.
Oh, that
because you're
time.
gonna get the whole brain.
Or, yeah.
You're gonna get the whole brain,
That's
but you're gonna get the whole brain with a completely different direction that gradient's been applied in.
Right.
And so that's the reason. And we combine all of these things together to be able to now know if we had 30 different directions. Now we know, based on those different directions, we can now map the places that water cannot or has not gone in any one of those different directions. So that way we start to map the actual white matter tracks.
Nice.
So that's the premise of tractography.
Is there like an industry standard or like expectation of how many directions?
Yeah. I mean, as usual, nobody completely.
Is it meant to be like a minimum of 12 or I don't know?
Well, think about it. The more diffusion directions the more vectors that you're using, the more specific you're going to be. The more options that you have, you've exhausted basically to say, hey, maybe something lost signal or gained signal just because my gradient just never happened to hit that sweet spot in any of my 12 directions.
Right.
So like the really high stuff, the cue ball imaging. That's like 90 directions and above. When you really start to do high-end neuro work, that's typically, for regular DTI, and this is just my opinion, I wouldn't use anything less than 20 directions if you're serious about, really making sure that you understand the behavior and be able to generate white matter tracks appropriately. And you get what you're trying to do, and there's limitations on DTI, big time. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, if there are two fibers that are crossing in the same pixel, the regular tensor model is limited. So it says, okay, here's one here, here's one here. It comes up with the average, and so you actually it thinks in that pixel that you have it's the average of the two.
Right.
And so that's one of the reasons why. As you get more and more directions, you become less dependent on a model and more dependent. And just you have true real data. So like a model, right?
Right.
If I go to the gym, which hasn't happened a lot lately, but if I go to the gym and I type in how old I am and my age, my weight, everything like that, it's going to tell me how many calories I'm burning. Is that real? No. It's based on a model. Same thing with DTI or with a tensor model. We are jumping to a lot of conclusions based off of this. It's called the Runge-Kutta method, and it's just math. And you need at least 6 different directions. There's 6 different coefficients that you have to solve to be able to for this DTI for the tensor. So you'll notice that you can't go lower than 6 directions on any vendor to be able to on your DTI.
I have noticed that. Yeah.
The higher that you get up, the less dependent you are on the model, and the more you have true data that you don't need that model anymore.
That's the goal in MRI, right?
Yeah.
To be as true to the patient as possible.
It depends on what you're using it for, though.
Right.
If you're using it for,
research.
Research, things like that. You're going higher. You're trying to make it to where you really have a good idea of that mapping. If you're looking at that and you don't need as specific of data for resection, or you just want to kind of get an idea. But like I said, 20 and above, 30 is great. More is better.
Right.
Is it used outside of brain imaging?
DTI?
Yeah, because
spine.
My experience is only brain imaging.
Yeah, you can use it in spine. I used it in the brachial plexus.
Ooh, I bet that was pretty.
Yeah, well, it'll be garbage if you're doing single shot.
Can we look at an image of a brachial plexus DTI?
It's probably not done that frequently. Can we Google it?
Google that, Katie?
I don't know. You can Google your medical results. You must be able to Google. Yeah.
Don't reveal that episode. This is a teaser. People just saw that.
See if you can do brachial plexus DTI, and typically just go to images, right there. You can ask Dr. Google. There we go. Yeah, you can be able to. Some friends of mine are doing DTI in the breast to also to be able to map out some like connectivity and that kind of thing. The reason. So this is a great point. So I would really, the problem with because when you're doing DTI, right, typically you're going to superimpose that over a spoiled 3D gradient echo.
Right.
Like
Some kind of 3D T1.
Sometimes 3D, exactly.
Yeah.
But think about if you're doing body diffusion, body DTI, and think about that distortion, and you're putting that over an image that doesn't, a set that doesn't have distortion on it, and so you really can't trust that. And so one of the things, that's really where that segmented k-space comes in, segmented EPI comes in. If I'm really doing, I really want to do high-end, and I really want to make sure there's as close of a match
Co-registration?
to my, yeah, because if you're doing neurography,
Yeah.
I want to look at the ADC of, to be able to look at the health of my vessel and my nerves, but I also want those nerves to superimpose over the actual cube or the space sequence that I'm doing neurography on. Otherwise, you can't really fuse them.
Is there post-processing involved with DTIs typically?
Oh, yeah. And, that's going to be very vendor-specific.
Mm-hmm.
Terra Recon does things very differently than single via versus Vital. But ideally, what you're trying to do is because
Get those pretty colors.
we're about to go down a rabbit hole. You guys ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. So a lot of times people will come out with, and I answer a lot of questions on this on forums. Sometimes people will come out with a DTI and they'll say, okay, this is the amount of tracks that exist. But that's not true. So inside of any one of these post-processing services or apps, they have a set of criteria that some strand has to reach in order for it to count as a tract. So it has to have a certain amount of...
So if it falls below that, then it won't be recorded or...
Exactly right. And where that comes in, so those values are typically put in the brain. But think about... So there's something called fractional anisotropy. Okay?
Good word.
Well, I'm used to seeing the
That's
abbreviation.
the largest one I know, FA.
Yeah, FA.
So
I'm better with acronyms.
Samesies, my friend, samesies. But FA, hold on. Sorry.
No.
So, yeah, I know. So, FA values, it's think of it as the amount of directionality something has. So I think about this, this analogy with desks. So
okay.
If something, let's say we're in a classroom, and here's my desk here, and I have a...
Now, are you the teacher?
Are we switching that camera?
I'd like to think so. So, got it? Top down, Katie.
SI, baby.
Thank you. So let's say these are my desks, and I am here. Here's the teacher's desk, just for completing the Reggie analogy.
Thank you.
So this because of the distance, let's just say there's something completely above. So if I'm a student and I say, hey, can you please come to the front of class? So at that point, and there's a wall right here, okay? So this is another example. So the student can jump up and down, the student can go back and forth, but the way that student moves the best is right to left. Okay?
Right.
So that's your eigen. That's the type of diffusion or the direction of diffusion that has the greatest ability to the greatest directionality. So, and at this point, if I put you in a room with no desk and I said, hey, and you just close your eyes and start to walk, you would not have a directionality. You would not have
fractional anisotropy?
Well, you wouldn't have an eigen. So,
okay.
So if I put you in a room, just whatever, you would have the same ability to move in all directions. So at that point, you would actually create a circle. That is called isotropic diffusion. If I've got you here, you can go this way and this way, but you can go this way more. That means that your eigen, A to P, is small. Your eigen top to bottom, because you can only jump so high, is small, but your eigen right to left is large, so it makes a pill shape. So that's what we're looking for when we're doing DTI, is the tracks, is that we're putting these eigens together per pixel and trying to figure out what direction it is. So that's just regular isotropic diffusion or anisotropic.
Right.
Think about it. An isotropic voxel has the exact same dimensions
all
in
the way around.
every direction.
Right.
Anisotropic
Without.
Makes sense.
It just is. Yeah, it's some kind of rectangle.
Yeah.
So same thing here. So think about this. I can now if I start to close my eyes and I'm bumping into these different desks on my way out, this is my directionality. That's my fractional anisotropy. Now if I had two desks that were like this and they were really, really close to each other, and I asked that student to come up, that student has a very high directionality, and that is fractional anisotropy.
I see.
So now we get an FA value as well. Say it with me, class. Fractional
anisotropy.
Yeah, you can't actually say anisotropy.
Anisotropy.
Yeah, but I mean, and I was using this, for instance, if you're looking to differentiate MS versus ischemia, sometimes you're not sure.
Yeah.
If you think about it, ischemia, you have higher FA values with ischemia. So if you, for MS, we have, wait, hold on. For MS, it's actually eaten. No, so it's opposite. Sorry. So for MS, we eat the insulation.
Myelin, right?
Yeah. We eat the it eats the myelin sheath and makes it less conductive,
Right.
and so that fluid has more room between the two of it. So you can differentiate. Just do it next time you're having
Just do a DTI on
MS
there.
patient. Do a DTI, and to be able to see if you look at your area that has MS in it, it will have very, very different values than if you can compare them to another patient that's maybe a little older and has some ischemia. You'll have different FA values.
That's interesting.
Yeah, if you'll see, do you still have the color maps?
Oh yeah, we could pull up the FA map.
So what the FA map is doing, in this case, the Runge-Kutta method. That's like the basic, math of tensor.
If you just clicked Visage, yeah.
Okay. So
Sorry.
No, I'm sorry, Katie. I'm putting you on the spot. No, it's okay. So we have the FA, and then we have the color FA. Let's do the color FA just. So you'll see here what this is doing. It's telling you not only. I mean, if you were to put this into some post-processing software, you can actually see the FA value that it's getting, so how much directionality that it has. But you'll see the green in this case. It's showing you white matter tracks that are moving A to P.
So
Oh,
color
nice.
represents direction.
That's right. And you'll see it's kind of a combination. So in this, and it doesn't necessarily mean all vendors are like this. This is just what it's saying. So if you scroll up a little bit higher to the corpus callosum.
Yeah.
A little higher. I'll tell you when. Oh, other way.
Back.
Oh, I thought I would go in a loop. Sorry.
That's okay. So right there, we know that the corpus callosum, the splenium of the corpus callosum, goes right to left. So you see, red is right to left. Whereas if we go, can you go down closer to the spine, Katie? So you see how my cervical spine coming up, that's blue.
Blue, yeah.
And you'll see a combination. If it's purple, that's a combination of red and blue. So you know that not all tracks are just going one direction.
That's the
Man, I love
averaging
that
out that you
band.
were talking about,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly. So if it's
I heard that. By the way.
One direction.
so if you go through and it's a combination, then that means that it's a combination of going A to P and head to foot, or right to left and head to foot. So that's a general understanding of the directionality of those tracks.
Nice.
That is cool.
And you'll notice in the gray matter and the periphery, we have isotropic diffusion. So gray matter, there is no directionality inside of the mush that actually tells our body, the gray matter is telling our body what to do. The white matter is the telephone wires that are telling my fingers to start to move. So that's the reason why when you guys are doing tumor planning or something like that, you need both. Because I could scoop out that tumor and also scoop out that little telephone line, and then there doesn't matter. I mean, you know what I mean? If you get the tumor, but you also get a normal bit of white matter that's responsible for or transferring that data.
You done lost that connection.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's above my pay grade gigantically. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know, right?
So, but that's a really cool.
And that just shows the importance of the sequence too, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, if it's really helping the neurosurgeons kind of plan their trajectories and things like that, man.
It's also got applications big time for concussion.
Oh yeah, TBIs, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yep. So there's really and diffusion, same thing. If I've got a tumor at some place, that the secondary to a tumor, the cells swell. The
Right.
same effect that you're having if you have cells that are swelling because of stroke and they can't pump anymore. As a tumor grows and grows, there's less extracellular water and intracellular water exchange there, and so you get restricted diffusion because of tumor as well. So that's another reason why people are doing whole body diffusion for cancer screenings.
Yeah, we do whole body.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Make sure, though, if you're doing whole body, if it comes out and it's a large stack, remember, I don't know, are you guys doing it axially or are you doing it coronally?
It's all axials all the way down,
Okay.
yeah.
So you want this to be in isocenter, obviously, right?
Right.
But you can, if you're willing, you can be able to reduce your slices and make it to where your block is small. If your block is small, then you're shimming you're a smaller area, so you also have a
right.
more homogeneous magnetic field. So one thing I would say is that even if you pull this from a vendor tree and it's large, it's going to be, if you minimize your TR and it's still within range, you can still do the exact same thing, but also increase your image quality because of your shim. There's a lot of things that can happen because of diffusion. Oh, another thing, sorry. With diffusion, you always need a really, really robust fat suppression method. Because, so all diffusion, if you're going to use...
Kim.
What'd you say?
Kim, like a Kim fat sat or spare or
That's the problem
IR?
with those larger fields of view, is that as your field of view gets larger, you're also your B0 shim is also worse.
Right.
So because of that, you can have protons that are not moving at the same speed. Therefore, they're not experiencing that spectral fat suppression. So a lot of times the vendors get crazy or get clever and have a wider bandwidth of the fat suppression method, and so that way more protons get excited. They experience that knockdown, or they can use an inversion recovery method, to where it's much less susceptible to B0 inhomogeneity. So,
because now you're setting that null point for that tissue.
that's exactly right.
All right.
Reggie,
Check the link in the bottom for that episode because it was amazing.
Do you know about T1 recovery?
Just a little bit.
Oh, my.
I had this guy named Matt come on the show. You got to meet him.
Makes sense though, right?
Yeah, totally makes sense. Yeah.
Thank you. No, but you'll see that diffusion it's very practical. It's something we use all the time, so you have to accept it. It's not, and it's something that, regardless if you have a magnet that's 30 years old or if you have a magnet that's 3 days old, you're still going to have the same challenges, and you're still going to need to accomplish those same rules in the
game,
checkmark
right?
list of, and sometimes you don't have that segmented K space. You only have the single shot, so you
Right.
know that you need to minimize your echo spacing as best you can. You need to be ramping those gradients as high as possible. So if you, depends on the vendor, but you're trying to make the amplitude of your diffusion gradients faster, a ramp up. So I don't want to get too specific onto that, but on Siemens you have a 3 and a 4 scan trace. You ever seen that? You notice that? On Philips, same thing. You're trying to, because something that I want to just implant in your mind is you can either have a diffusion gradient that's applied for a long time that is at a low amplitude. It's going to do the exact same thing as a diffusion gradient that's applied at a high amplitude for a short amount of time. Think about it like the area under the curve. So I can either have something. I'm going, Katie. Sorry. I can either have a gradient that is it's this at a very low amplitude gradient over a long amount of time. I don't want that because that's going to increase my TE.
Right.
Or I can have the same amplitude of gradient apply. So if you put jelly beans inside of here equals the same amount of jelly beans that are here. But the thing about it here is that we can read out that TE much faster here, save signal, and have just less artifacts just as a whole. So ideally, you want to be ramping up all of your gradients as high as possible. So we're doing that by using parallel imaging.
Right.
We're gonna ramp up our phase encoding gradient. One way or another, you can typically the readout is not as important because it happens so fast. But the phase encoding direction and also figuring out a way to ramp up and have a higher amplitude of gradient over a shorter amount of time.
Nice. Man.
And actually, that kind of summed it up. I was going to try to do that in my own way, but you did it way better. I mean, what's your takeaways? A few. I mean, definitely keep your TE down, parallel imaging, like you said.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff. Good stuff.
TR down.
Thank you, man.
You're welcome. What do we adjust first, though? What's the first thing?
Every time we are going to want to adjust our TE.
Exactly. Yeah. So because sometimes if you adjust your TR first, it makes it to where your TE doesn't go down as far.
Oh, right.
So start out with minimizing your TE, and then go with your TR, and you'll notice that you have more signal. A lot of people think you have to have a higher TE to have a diffusion. Not the case. We really, ideally, would like a proton density.
Well, because too secretly, and it doesn't reflect in your relative SNR. It's kind of like how TR, when you boost that, it doesn't reflect it. But technically, the higher you go with your TE, the less longitudinal magnetization you're going to have, right?
Yes.
So you're losing signal.
That's right.
When you're increasing your TE.
And the whole point of diffusion anyway is losing signal on purpose.
Right.
And so we want to find ways to only lose signal because of the water that's not getting dephased and rephased. We want to make sure that we're getting signal back any other way that we can.
Right.
Especially we're losing signal because we're filling less lines of K-space. So we're losing signal because we're doing parallel imaging. We're losing signal on purpose because we have the longer B values.
Right.
So you want to try to get that back in terms of, I mean, your big driver there is minimizing your TE.
Minimize that TE.
Love it.
I love it too.
Right.
Another good one.
All mark.
Right.
TE does not affect your actual distortions. It affects your signal.
Right.
Trying to minimize those distortions or maximize them depending on whatever you're trying to accomplish.
Is there a sweet spot for your the minimum echo spacing that you want, or do you just try to minimize it as much as you can?
Try to minimize it as much as you can. You can play with the receiver bandwidth a little bit as well, and you try to find a little sweet spot there.
Yeah.
Typically, ideally, you want to be less than 1 millisecond.
Okay.
So when you're getting to like 0.5, 0.6 milliseconds, that's only going to be possible if you're filling a little bit of K-space at a time with that little segmented readout, that resolve.
Mm-hmm.
But ideally, you want to minimize that echo spacing any way you can.
And nice. Yeah. Man, thank you, man.
Did we miss anything, Katie?
The thumbs up.
I love it. Yes.
Great, yeah.
Well, I think that's it then,
Yeah.
Reggie.
No, for sure.
My shortest episode
Zone,
easily.
Zone 3 Podcast. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. Tell your friends about us. Do all those things that YouTubers tell you to do.
For sure.
Matt, thank you.
Yeah,
You're
for having me.
awesome.
You gotta definitely give a big shout out to Aegis too, our
Aegis,
sponsor.
thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, they're awesome. They're a big part of you coming out here. Thank you, Matt.
Definitely check their link out in the description below.
Yeah. So Zone 3 Podcast. We are out.
Good.